I like that connection to how the beginning of teaching is kind of like when you first start writing. I could see that because, when I first started writing, I remember it was so funny because I wrote I wrote songs and I wrote shorter pieces. I remember sitting there talking about, just how much I love books and I was like, you know what, maybe I could write a novel, right? And I just started kind of talking about it. And she was like, just do it. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize that was something I could just do.
From the mouths of people who don't take the time to see them for who they are and who'd rather be the student down with grades rather than lift them up with the work that matters. And I'm tired of hearing about these kids who don't share your values because your values are what put us here in the first place. And I don't know if you've looked around lately.
When you trust these young minds to do what they're wired to do, the human brain is designed to learn. It is literally built to get information, process it, and go forth from there. I don't know. Social media is scary, right? Because it's new and it's so manipulative. If we had more people looking for what's true rather than trying to push specific sides of an agenda, I think we'd be a lot farther in a lot of these hard conversations we're having.
This is Ricky Ray. Welcome to the Curious Observer podcast, exploring thoughts and creating a space within the overwhelm of the newfound virtual reality with the spirit of curiosity. Our next guest, I'm really excited to share how we met, was quite the unique circumstance that perhaps if it was not the 20s, could not happen. And I say this because it was through an Instagram story promoted by none other than, I'm sure our next guest may agree. I'm curious what his thoughts are. If anyone is not familiar with who I'm about to mention, I would consider as the Albert Einstein of the 21st century, pioneering through the exploration also of space and through these roaring 20s, right? The economist, mathematician, just to name a few. Famously also just dubbed a collection of intellectuals as the intellectual dark web, Eric Weinstein. He was promoting our guest, his 200th podcast episode, talking about fixing the education system. My goodness, the caliber in which these two individuals exploring thoughts and really digging into the questions and the kinds of things that people talk about in education these days that feel largely ignored and left behind, and we just kind of have to accept it and endure and, okay, next lesson plan. All right, let's just move on, and never really get addressed. And I really suggest you guys stay tuned with that podcast. I want to ask him to plug that in. He is a father, husband, educator, author. By the way, book number 3 on the way. Stay tuned on that. I want to ask him to plug that in also. Podcast host of Teach Me Teacher podcast. Welcome, Jacob Chastain. How you doing, brother?
Hey, man, I'm doing good. I like the energy you bring. We've talked. This is the first time I was speaking like face to face, but we've been back and forth, and you always got this. You always got the energy, so I'm here for it, man.
Well, man, I think a lot of it is, I'm sure the reason you may recognize that is because you're an educator yourself, and that flows through you just by nature. Would you say?
Yeah, totally, man. I think half of what we do is the energy that we bring to our work, and I mean, how do we expect kids to have energy if we don't, right?
Oh man, amen to that, because you can see it in their eyes when they're like, And it was like, hey, right over here. It's almost like you have to do like a little dance, but with the mind, with the mind. And, I thought I would kick it off a little bit with, showcasing the shirt. I think you would appreciate. Can you read it?
Boom. That's right. Teaching is a work of heart. I believe it.
Yes, man. What comes to mind when you hear that?
I don't know. I think so. I don't know. I don't want to get too deep too early, but in there's a lot of professions that it takes a long time to kind of become it, right? Like, we expect doctors to put in a lot of work to get where they're at, and lawyers, and just any number of these professions that serve a unique skill set in society. And teaching is one of those that is relatively easy to get into compared to something like being a doctor or a lawyer or something like that. I would argue just as important, if not more important, but it's fairly easy to go through, get your 4-year degree, and then, graduate with enough merit to either just get it in education or have a good enough GPA to where you can go to an alt cert specification or not specification, certification. And here's the thing. I like that. I am alt certified. I didn't get my degree in teaching. So this isn't coming from a superior standpoint. My point is because it is relatively easy in professional terms to get into, I think a lot of people get into it for the wrong reasons. So when I think of, teaching is from the heart, what that really makes me think about is, you can get into this profession, but the people that have the heart for it, the people that understand what we're doing, the people that can have a hard day where every kid seems to be disrespectful or disruptive. And then you go home and you're like, I can't wait to go back tomorrow, right? Those educators are the ones that end up staying. But the reason why we have so much turnover and why most teachers don't last after 5 years is, I think, that thing where their heart wasn't in the right place. And you're going to figure it out one way or another. Teaching isn't a job you stay in if your heart isn't in it. So
tells you, yeah.
That's right. Because we've worked with people like this before. I've seen and there's no shame. Just like there'd be no shame in me like failing at a tryout for like the NBA or like the NFL or something like that. Like, the people are going to shame me for that. And these people shouldn't be shamed either. I think people like you and me need to do a better job at showing people that, yes, this profession's great and there's a lot of perks that come with it, but it's also some of the hardest work you'll ever do. And I think, unfortunately, people just don't realize that.
Amen. This is exactly why I wanted to invite you to share your vibe, because you're in the trenches, you're facing the future. These kids, it's not just something that you just do the job, and with respect to all other jobs, by the way, by no means to say anything else to any of anything else, but specifically the nature of this job is the facing of the future. And I think that's so important. I thought I would invite you to share, these three ideas. And, on the last one, I feel that we can thread into the vortex of what can be in our share of vibe. And that is, I welcome you to share more about yourself, about your endeavors, and really your vision of today's virtual landscape.
Oh, man. So, in terms of me, it's always awkward to give your own pitch, right? About kind of just who you are. I think I got you. I think the easiest way to kind of get there is to understand that I am someone who is driven to do certain things because of the life I live. So growing up, I would say I was, early on, I lived in Texas my entire life. I had a relatively normal life up to a point. I was just kind of middle class suburban. Parents made decent money. I never was without. But as I got older, I started realizing that there were things wrong in the house. And then as I got older and older and things just started clicking, I realized that both my parents were addicted to drugs. My dad was abusive. Most of those traits passed down to my siblings before me.
So would you say that it was invisible to you, not recognizable? It was just the nature of, and the patterns were not something that you would be able to at that time pause and be like, hey, is that the thing that maybe, I don't know if we should be. It was just a full reception of what just reality as you're receiving it.
Yeah. To say that trauma was the norm isn't an over exaggeration, but I didn't know any difference. So like I said, it was, I lived a pretty comfortable life. There was no issues because of the parents I had. I didn't have a lot of parental supervision. So, my house was the ones that the friends came to get away with, like, playing like Grand Theft Auto and stuff like that. We just got to do whatever we want and just hang out. And we didn't get into too much trouble or anything, but it was just one of those things. But as we got older and some of the family stuff, the facade, so to speak, started cracking, my parents or my friends' parents started, resisting people coming over more. So that was like cue number one that things were kind of going wrong. And then a friend would come over and like, they'd be like, "Where's your mom at?" And I'm like, "I don't know. Like, she just left." And like, she would come back in the middle of the night. And there were things like that just started slowly cropping up as I was getting older.
And feedback.
Yeah. Right. And eventually, the dots started connecting, but it wasn't until I was older that I realized that I think one of the main reasons why I did decent once I kind of left school or decent as I was going up through school was because I had like all of these teachers that just took care of me in weird ways. Like I remember, I tell this story at the beginning of my book, Teach Me Teacher, but it's this story that my parents, so there was like one big fight that happened in my family that kind of drew them apart. There was a lot of fights, but there was one big one where my dad basically like just beat the crap out of my mom. And it was like this hugely traumatic thing. That's a hard question to answer. I don't know. I think I was around 10 or 11, somewhere around there.
That blur.
Yeah. I mean, I was in middle school, so maybe a little bit older. So 12. But we ended up hauling and moving out. We left with my mom and we moved out to this country school where I hung out for a little bit. And then we ended up coming back. But when I came back, my fourth grade teacher sat me in the back of the room and she gave me this talk about this cloud. And she goes, "Jacob, there's that cloud up here and you can put whatever you want in there. You can just shove it all in there, whatever thoughts you have or whatever." And as a kid, I don't know why she's telling me this. My teacher just called me to the back of the room. She's telling me this stuff. I'm not connecting that she's giving me a life skill. And she basically said that you can go there and it needs to stay in there. And then one day when it's time to rain, it'll come out and it'll be fine and it'll be, nourishing, so to speak. And as an adult, I look back on that and I was like, what she did, like some people might frown at like, oh no, like kids need to face their problems directly and everything like that. And maybe I should have, but what she gave me in that speech was a way to compartmentalize. So essentially what happened as I grew older, I was doing that naturally is I would just put the bad stuff over here and then I would go do work. And then anyone that knows this, once you put something away, you have to process it somehow, right? Some people process it in negative ways.
You found a chamber.
That's right. People process, a lot of my, like some of my siblings, they ended up processing in negative ways, right? They turn to, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, various other abuses. And I believe the reason why I sidestepped some of those bad choices, so to speak, or some of those ways to cope was because my dad was a musician and I happened to be obsessed with music growing up. So there's old videos of me sitting in front of my dad's drum set with 2 sticks. All the other kids are running around. I'm sitting there watching him play for hours. So I was playing, Inner Sandman on the drums when I was like 5 and playing, Knocking on Heaven's Door from Guns N' Roses when I was like 7.
So you knew the zone early on.
Yeah, like that creative zone, right? Like I knew it was an outlet already because when my family was fighting, you know what I used to do? I would go out to the garage, crank the PA, turn Linkin Park on, and then just start jamming in the garage like as loud as I could. So I was practicing a skill, but I was also letting all of this come out. Fast forward a few years, what I ended up doing is, along with my discovery of love for books, is I started writing, right? I joined bands early on and we wrote music.
How old were you here?
It was probably 14. Okay. Around then.
So when you had that talk with that teacher, that was in that time frame when you came back. So you were like 12, 13,
yeah, I was like that window. 4th grade. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Well, so it was early on. So I said it was middle school, but it was around 4th grade when that happened. And then middle school was when the family actually broke apart.
Right. And if I may interject just real quick, I'm just very curious. It's just like, wow. Do you remember by chance what may have triggered the teacher to pull you aside and share that? Like I imagine a student of mine who may not recognize, they might be blurting out their emotional pain that's reflective of, of social, I guess, buttons that are in the know of now. And they say, so they're called, and within the know, they know what that means, deliberately to kind of create a separation from the teacher. And it's like, oh, I recognize something's happening. Hey, come here. And I call the student and place, here's a common corner or something like that, and share an insight, and I notice that they're listening. I wonder, is that something that may have happened for you, or is that something that the teacher perhaps you think may have known before you walked in?
It was probably a little bit of both. I would imagine the biggest factor was my mom was, she was like one of the lunch ladies. Like she didn't do the food, but she was like a lunch monitor, right? She would just walk around and monitor the kids in the cafeteria. So they knew who she was. And I imagine when I left, I was gone for a month or so, and then we came back. I imagine some of that probably came back for that.
Wow. So you were saying, so you picked up writing. So there's a momentum generated from these events, these stepping stones, perhaps, that were becoming visible to you. Would you say?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I've learned growing up, but also as a teacher when I'm working with my kids in writing, is a lot of when younger people are processing, a lot of the times they don't know what they're processing. Right. This is why you get the phrases that I love to say, and that none of these are my coined phrases, but one of my favorite ones is from Spencer Kagan, where he says, every child demonstrating a behavior is demonstrating a need. And that could be anything, right? It could be any type of behavior. We think only negative, but that's not true. But so in this term of this feeling of processing, I was doing a lot of this without realizing it. And then, as I looked back at other people and maybe students who have had similar issues, or just people that I've known, I think a lot of people get trapped in the cycle of trauma and in the cycle of abuse and the cycle of just kind of like this self-loathing that happens in families like this, is that they never find a healthy outlet. Right. The people that get trapped are the ones that don't find that connection. And what drives that could be anything, man. I think I'm the youngest of 4 kids, and I'm the only one that's gone to college. There's a lot of firsts that came through me. So I wouldn't say it was destiny, because that's kind of rude of destiny to kind of, to play favorites in such a way. So
but you're recognizing that certain patterns lure to further unlockings that further made other patterns available that created a natural gravitational pull. And it's almost as though it was not of your own will, but it was always your will in deciding towards it. But it was only available because those stepping stones were placed in such a way that were understood, that it created sight ahead. Would you say something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that enough things were around me that gave me a lot of options. I'm very fortunate in that way. And I think the biggest one was teachers. I had so many teachers, I cite them by name. I write about so many in that book, which was why it was fun to talk to Eric Weinstein, because he had the opposite experience. So it was funny.
I noticed.
But the teachers, like my 3rd grade teacher taught me the power of song, and my 1st grade teacher taught me the power of understanding people's culture. She was very focused. I remember that in kindergarten. 5th grade and 4th grade, I had my first male teacher, and he taught me, he was the first one that showed me Lord of the Rings, and he was reading The Hobbit to us before the Hobbit movies came out, and he was doing the Gollum voice, and
I love that.
That was such a pivotal moment for me, because it showed me that not every book is a dead dog book. I can also pick up books and go fight dragons and shoot magic. And that opened up reading for me. And then middle school is kind of a blur. Sorry, all my middle school teachers. That was when everything was really going wrong. But then things pick up back in high school. I had Miss Hammer, who is she's still my mentor today. She ended up being my academic coach at my first campus. She ended up being an assistant principal at my first campus. I've worked under her. I've worked with her.
Wow.
She has guided me in more ways than one. So all of that. So my creativity given to me by my dad, combined with great education that gave me a variety of experiences to kind of figure out where I wanted to be. And then honestly, a drive to make my mark for some reason. And I think some of that comes from my dad, being a performer as a kid. I'm sure it was ingrained in me that attention was positive because I would perform at like all the adults are drinking and partying and stuff. And I'm the kid with the cool drum set and everyone's like, yeah, cause I'm actually kind of good. So, right. They can support it for longer than 10 minutes.
Yes.
So, but that, you multiply all of this together, right? You get someone like me who is incredibly passionate about my work because I was practically saved by the work I'm doing now. Someone who's driven to create in a variety of ways, whether it be a lesson plan, a student experience, or something like a podcast or a book. And then a drive to make my mark forces me to not quit when I ultimately fail all the time. So it's a unique set of circumstances, but I don't know. I wouldn't change it.
Yeah. So it's like you've been able, the thing that we all get to see along the journey is the reframing of failures. And I think that's what a lot of teachers do. It's the facilitating of not letting up, because the default for student is to let go. And especially with such a pivotal, vital, healthy realm of viewing, especially when it comes to thinking, and especially in the capturing of thought in the form of writing. I think that's so important that you're doing that. And it's so cool that such unlockings unveiled you in a position where you get to daily face that for the students face that with the students, so that they may see that for themselves and be able to carry forth through those potentialities of letting go. Instead, hold on, just watch, look, follow this, onward. You see, you got it. Keep going. I'm going to put it on my wall. And then who's next? I think that's how I'm curious. Is that something that came to you in terms of putting things on the wall and creating, and how vital did you find that within the culture sphere of the classroom, putting up the work?
This is the stuff that I really love talking about because I'm such a nerd for this craft, really. But, like every teacher, I think, except there's a few rock stars that I've met that didn't go through this phase, and I'm incredibly jealous of them. But every teacher kind of starts off bad, right? Like we don't really understand how to control kids in a way that is healthy, right? We kind of rely on dominance approach, and eventually we learn that doesn't work. You have to have a different tool set, and we wonder why, like I used to stare at my kids and be like, why aren't my kids reading? And I had a literacy coach who changed how I taught. She essentially looked at me and goes, well, what are you giving them to read? And I realized that I was just giving them worksheets. I was like, well, I feel like my kids aren't reading anything. She was like, well, what happens if we let them read? What happens if we let them choose their own books? She knew the answer, but she was guiding me to it like a good mentor. Wow. And so this reading thing, though, this idea of letting kids self-select text, what I ended up realizing and developing over time was, man, if I let their interests drive where they're going to be, they're not going to not want to read because they're accessing material that is relevant to them for whatever reason, right? My job then becomes someone that can teach within that. It became less about crafting lessons that would get kids to answer the right question. It became, how can I get them into the act of reading and then teach them through that? And this evolved, that came first. The reason I'm telling you that is because that was like step number one. Step number two in writing became, I taught writing very basic, right? It was like, here's an assignment. Here's what you write. We're going to do outlines. We're going to do all of this. And as someone who was writing far before I became a teacher, writing creative writing, poetry writing, songwriting, fiction, all that good stuff. I love your poetry, by the way. Oh, thank you. I was one day I realized, I was like, this isn't what writers do. I was like, I don't outline everything I write. I don't sit here and create this obnoxious plan. And I don't put on a timer and only write for that and never stop and never get distracted. I was like, I turn on music, I get in the vibe, I think, I wander, I look around, and
it's a chaotic state.
That's right. Like anyone, like you can tell who writes and who doesn't because they realize that writing isn't what the movies show us as writing, which is some struggled. You might be struggling, but like, not this person just sitting there like, putting together their book and they're just haunted and they're creating this great work. No, most writing is kind of horrible and you just work on it over time. And eventually your horrible writing becomes less horrible. So you have to work on it less, but it's always a process and it's always messy. It's like it's the creative process. You're literally taking clairvoyant thoughts and making them physical onto a page. There's nothing simple about this process, right? So what ended up happening is when I released from kids in their writing, and I'm skipping some steps here, but once I released from them and allowed them to write what they wanted to, they started writing at incredible rates. They were like, I want to do this. And then when I was like, hey, you know what? We're writers, real writers publish. I was like, let's publish. So what does publish mean, Chastain?
The releasing.
The releasing, the creative process of getting something out there, right? Yeah. The number one enemy to creativity is someone who won't release anything ever. It's something that I fight a lot. I'm comfortable with it because I like the process of putting something out there, letting it fail, putting it out there, letting it fail. Some people don't get past that, but you can't fix what isn't put out. You can't go to the next thing if you never release the next thing. So when I started letting my kids do that though, what happened is they're like, oh, this is cool. And then I was like, oh, you know what? Let's highlight some of these pieces. So I was like, we always have data walls. I was like, I hate data walls. I don't care about the data wall. So I was like, if I have to put my data wall up there, I'm going to put these pieces all around the wall. I'm going to put so many pieces that they write that you're not even going to care about the data because you're going to see all this writing on the wall, poetry, nonfiction, whatever they decide to write. And when I decided to do that, kids, they knew it would happen at the end of every 6 weeks. So every grading period here, they would come in and they would just go straight to the walls because they wanted to see what pieces made it, what pieces got up there, who did it. And the energy changed, but what ended up happening, more importantly, is that they started becoming phenomenal writers because they were writing so much, creating, and going on to the next thing. So when I started focusing on what real processes are and kind of push school off to the side, the kids blossomed, and it's been incredible to see.
Well, this gives me the opportunity to highlight one poem that I really that I was really smacked with out of many, but I wanted to bring up one. These kids.
We drive slow in school zones to protect the future. Yet we rush to test even their bones. It's putrid. It's stupid. Why do we ask our students to live life with prudence, but then we punish their shortcomings by taking them out of music? They see us, They hear us too. You think that kid doesn't know what you think about him? You think you hide your disdain? It's plain, I can tell you that, written in paint right on your face. I know, 'cause I've seen it too. In class and in the mirror. I've been on both sides, behind enemy lines. I've seen my life through a teacher's eyes, and how they check my mind through a computer's eyes are the ones that spent the time to look at my lines. And I gotta say, I knew who took the time. I knew who thought about mine. I knew who went home at night and thought about how I was just a poor tyke. And I knew who went home and thought about what to do to make it right. And I know my kids know it too. They see it. They see who works for them, who talks with them, who listens to them. They see who puts a stain on who they are and who comes to clear the window. Pain, you see, comes from more than the physical. It gets taken from the mind and applies to the lyrical. The injustice of it all. It's like a song sang too many times, a wrong that pangs through every rhyme, a drum that beats too many lives. Their lives. So I'm tired of hearing about these kids. These kids don't respect us. They've got no work ethic. They don't care about learning. All they want is to sit on their phones and beg for likes like a sinner in mourning. You see, they come into our lives, these kids. They come in, and when it's over, these kids, they bear so much on their shoulders. These kids, they keep wrinkled work in their folders. These kids, they see the world being crushed by boulders. These kids, they see the endless war and dying soldiers. These kids, they see through the facade that smolders. So I'm tired of hearing about these kids. I want to see them, free them, unchain them from a system that doesn't feed them. I'm tired of hearing about these kids, the ones who feel like they're lost to school and have nothing to look forward to once this hell is done. And I'm tired of hearing about these kids from the mouths of people who don't take the time to see them for who they are and who'd rather be the student down with grades rather than lift them up with the work that matters. And I'm tired of hearing about these kids who don't share your values because your values are what put us here in the first place. And I don't know if you've looked around lately, but the sky isn't blue anymore. The grass isn't green anymore. The stars don't shine and the wind doesn't sing anymore. Until we meet these kids where they are, until we support these kids for who they could be, until we step aside and let them show us where to go, until we admit we're lost and no map and no light to see. And I'm tired of hearing about these kids. I want to hear from them.
The way you crafted it, the video, the echo, everything, every element, it was like, thank you. Thank you. And I wanted to highlight a takeaway from it that I think encapsulates everything you just said about what your discoveries have extracted within the students. And that was that this poem is I would describe it as the detailed outlinings through an eye of the students, and especially the phrase, they see the facade that smolders. And I started thinking about the fading impressions, the fading impressions of even writing, like, hey, let's read something. And then after a while, it's like, well, the reason why I don't like it, because they smoldered what they thought what writing would be, or anything would be, or interaction would be, relationships may be, being social, being civil in the classroom may be, or having respect to another teacher may be. And then you said, I want to hear from them. And I love that, because the whole theme was, these kids, all these kids, everyone's talking about these kids, and how much there's this sense of like, oh my goodness, can we just get these kids out of here, that vibe? And it ends with, I want to hear from them. And I'm inspired, just as Mr. Ron Clark has inspired me, and as well as many educators. It very much captured that spirit. If you're familiar with that book or that movie, it's a great movie, and I think there's a lot of parallel. I'm curious, what is that along the lines of what you would recognize in the students in really facing that diminishing effect, instead of, it's like calling forth from the diminishing?
Yeah. Like, are you asking if they're kind of like, if I'm calling forth from the diminishing, or if they are?
Ooh, I feel like, would you say that what you're doing is you're creating a space so that they may recognize they can actually call it forth?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, because that piece, These Kids, was written when I wrote it during a time where I just came off being a literacy coach at a campus that I didn't fit in well for a variety of reasons. But I heard, as a literacy coach, I walked into a lot of classrooms and a lot of schools, but I visited and I listened, and I would just hear you know, when I walked into a classroom that felt great and kids were clearly learning and they were excited to be in there and the teacher was excited, they always talked about what they knew about the kids. They always spoke about them as if they were just real people that they were working with. And when I went into classrooms that weren't effective and the kids weren't happy to be there, and if they were happy to be there, they were only happy because that was the class they got to wander around because the teacher couldn't tell them to sit down. Those teachers would they said those phrases like "these kids," and they would be like, "These kids won't listen. They don't respect
You heard
us."
that
Right?
phrase.
Those lines are directly from the mouths of people that are, quite frankly, I mean, they're ineffective. And the reason why they are is because they aren't listening to the kids. And one thing that I've learned during this process of giving kids freedom, because this is the number one thing I get asked about. They're like, well, how do you manage freedom? How do you manage kids having the choice in what they read? Shouldn't they read specific things? That's how we've always been taught. And how do you teach a kid how to write if they're writing whatever they want? And they go into all of this. And I really get the English teachers and some non-English teachers when I say I don't really teach grammar in specific ways. Like, well, you got to teach grammar. They got to know diagramming sentences and they have to know all of this. And it's the whole point of that, though, is when you trust these young minds to do what they're wired to do. The human brain is designed to learn. It is literally built to get information, process it, and go forth from there. So all the educator needs to be, in most instances, and this is our work. I'm talking about like people that don't have learning disabilities that get in the way of those processes and everything like that. So just your general population, their brains are wired to grow and to get this, but what they need are catalysts. You know, if you keep, go back to Plato's cave, if you keep people in a cave and you only show them one thing through this tiny little hole, that's all they're ever going to know. So it becomes less about, I'm going to shove the Great Gatsby in your face until you understand why the green light is red across the sea. Or I can show them that there is this field and I can go, hey, check this out. Oh, hey, check this out. And then as they start learning, hey, you need to stay away from those berries are kind of dangerous. Just, you got to cook them first before you go there. Ooh. As you're guiding them, they end up being able to travel farther and farther without you. And that is the entire goal of this. And here's the thing. It's biologically wired into them. So when it starts happening, it looks like magic. Like to me, I was like, I can't believe this is actually working. Now I had to put in, it didn't work out. I didn't just say, okay, you're free. And then things worked out amazingly. I had to create structures and I had to create expectations and I had to work with them as people. But in terms of how much freedom they have, it comes down to how good of a guide can I be for them in their journey across whatever it is that they're trying to do. And you know what? Kids soar, man. There's my favorite thing, not to plug a book, but the next book that's coming out is, I'm excited for it because I feature over 30 of their pieces in the book. And I let them like be a part of this whole process because I really see them as writers. I think, but I think they're some of the most, I taught them for 2 years. We left during COVID. We came back in person. But I had them for 2 years. So we had like this bonding experience through a pandemic and we went through the craziest school year. But what we did is we wrote a lot and we read a lot of writing. They helped me in some of my writing. I mean, these are 7th graders. And we're like, this is kind of unheard of. And I think the only reason why I've had so much success is because of trusting the freedom and then listening to the kids
and not being a tyrant over them.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I thought I would riff on a thought that's kind of like extracting into like our world, like as adults facing reality. Isn't it crazy? In the middle of all this, when we were their age, these such portals of technology allowance could not be. Like say a pandemic happened when we were their age, right? And all right, we're going to read, right? And all this kind of stuff, or the surfing of the internet space. What a Wild West it was, but also at the same time, just a vast portal. As now, like you said about, check out this other way of viewing. and beware of this. Be sure to cook it. I really liked how you use that analogy. I think that's something that our generation adults are facing when it comes to swimming in this newfound virtual pool of reality. Just the fact that you and I were able to intersect through an individual that mutually we follow the works of. I think that's so cool. I mean, it's such an invisible realm that it yet it allows things to become true. And it's so true to the point that you and I know that we're having this conversation, not just speaking to a glass.
Right.
Because I'm very curious, from being in the front lines with these future people, what's your opinion and how they are processing these times, these weird times where, they don't know what's going on. They don't know why people over here are going this way and that way. And they're saying, oh, they're expressing these, contentious tribes of that many people recognize as divisive. To them, they're just like, I don't know. I'm just a kid, man. What's your observation of like their eyes and what it's like for them and for you?
I don't know. I mean, I know a lot from talking to them, and we have every day when the lesson starts, or once the lesson's kind of done, I go out and I confer with them. Writing conference is essentially where you just sit down and you talk with their writing, you talk about their pieces or whatever. But in those conversations, you have a lot of interactions. I had over 1,000 conferences. I only know that because I have an iPad where I track all of them. That's 1,000 conversations with my 58 kids I had this year, of just talking about life and learning. And the one thing that I think is true for all kids is that they're kids, right? Like you said it yourself, like they're so absorbed in their own just world that a lot of them they don't really think beyond that all the time. And if they do, it's usually because it affects them somehow, right?
Yeah.
They're like, oh, well, I'm thinking about the job market because my dad lost his job, right? So they might have those connections, but I will say that might be what they talk about, but a lot of them do process stuff on a deeper level, especially in middle school, right? I saw these kids at the beginning of 6th grade when COVID wasn't even a thing, to having them in 7th grade during a pandemic throughout the whole year. So a lot of them and the racial tensions that went down because of George Floyd in the summer, and that stuff doesn't not affect. Sorry,
they're not going to ignore it.
Yeah, I mean it's there, and I work at a campus where we're over 50% Hispanic, we're about 20% Black, and then the rest are white, and we have a lot of kids from like the Congo and from some Pacific Islands and stuff like that.
What part of Texas? I'm in San Antonio.
DFW, so not too far from you.
Okay, well,
just right up north a little bit. Yeah, maybe we'll run into each other at a convention one day. But
yeah.
These communities, right? This isn't distant from them. This is very connected to some of their experiences, and they would talk about this and they would process this. And I heard a lot of race conversations that came up in our classroom, not always handled the best. I mean, adults don't even handle them the best, and kids definitely don't. But what I've realized is that kids are so not ingrained in political ideologies yet to be so divisive when they speak. When kids are divisive, they're trying to be mean, right? They're trying to
it's a lot more from within themselves than it is like trying to be representative of a collective.
Yeah, it's very it's very animal like, right? It's just like, no, this is my territory and I need you to feel that. Adults, on the other hand, are very ideological. We have political sides, sometimes to the extreme where you already know what you believe. You already know which station you're going to believe before you even hear what each station has to say, right? Those are our times. Kids don't live in that world. They might a little bit, they're hearing their parents talk and they're in that and they experience it from that. But in general, kids are very open to different ideas and they're very open to talking, and they're not of the mind that they can't voice their opinion or that they don't have a position to voice, what kids are usually kept back from is sharing their voice. So, and they learn that in school, right? We don't let kids talk about things that are that might not go with the norm. We don't even give them the option. We say, hey, you're going to write about this specific topic, or better yet, we give them 3 topics that we chose. So they still have choice, but these are our 3 topics. And so kids, what they learn over time is they learn that, oh, well, I just got to keep all that inside. I shouldn't be talking about it. And then what happens is they become their own echo chamber over time. They eventually become adult. That becomes a larger echo chamber. And now they believe something and they've never questioned a dang thing in their lives because they never voiced something loud enough to be challenged in the first place. So when going beyond this idea of just letting kids write because it's therapeutic, it gets them to process their lives and everything.
And also detach, like the detaching of that initial thought. Because I'm sure you've seen where, I'm curious what your thoughts on this, when writers are going for it. Like I've experienced it. I've never written ever. And I started writing ever since the world ended. And I was like, I felt an inclination. I feel like that book over there that I bought 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, just scream at me like, hey, just so you know, this is blank, just so you know. For some reason, I'm just letting you know, for some reason, I feel like I have to let you know, hey, it's blank. I'm like, okay, fine, I'll start. Oh, I just started every day just flowing with it, right? But I found myself, and I'm curious what you think. That initial thought, sometimes we don't want to let go of it. And then by letting go of it, more clarity comes from it. And it's by just allowing ourselves to just happily erase, and because we're making room for the more clear, juicy gold, perhaps. Would you say that's kind of the thing that you see? How would you describe that's what's happening in their creativity and also not being trapped in those echo chambers?
Well, you could almost think, I feel like you could think about this in the sense of, people have always asked, when you go look at those early cave paintings, right? The most ancient ones that were around a long time ago, people put their hands on it, right? What caused people to do that? What caused people to make their mark, to draw things and to eventually evolve into written language? You could almost imagine just the human brain trying to process all this information, and it was like I needed to come out in some way. So we started with this, and that released something in us. We're like, oh, what does that mean? And so we started playing with all of these symbols, and eventually you have written language and all this other stuff. You could see that pathway of, it's the brain's way of processing all of this. So when it comes down to writing, creating clarity for someone like you who hasn't really written, and then you start doing it, all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, like that's not really what I think. Or maybe, oh, this is kind of what I think, but this isn't really a formulated thought. Or why do I even think this? I have never even questioned why this is a belief I have. Those things happen, I think, in part because it just allows us to, writing is processing. Writing is reflection. Writing is creation. It's all of these things. There's a book called... Yeah, there's a book called The Acts of Teaching Writing by Joyce Carol. And in the intro, she says, writing is the most rigorous activity we will ever give children, and we take all of their power away from it. So I think as adults, for people that discover writing as adults, it's almost like, I don't know, like I feel like it would feel like being robbed, because you realize how beneficial it is once you kind of get past it.
Exactly how I would describe it. When I started doing it, I started recognizing, why was I wasting my time thinking I couldn't? Why was I wasting my time thinking that it was just something, oh, I'm a TV watcher. I remember thinking these thoughts as a kid, like, oh, I don't write or read. I'm a TV watcher. I got TV. I remember thinking that, and I remember even saying that to teachers, and they would be like, well, I'm like, looking back at it, I'm like, what? What do you mean, well? And it's just so powerful to recognize that. And if we may shift gears here, I'm very curious,
sure,
especially from the train of a teacher. And so that first time you're sitting in the classroom, right? I would describe writing the same way. Like the first time you have a bunch of kids, it's all a blur. Like, whoa, what's going on? And especially through the eyes of now, how What could you see within that blur now? And also not just in teaching, but perhaps even in writing.
I like that connection to how the beginning of teaching is kind of like when you first start writing. I could see that because, when I first started writing, I remember it was so funny because I wrote I wrote songs and I wrote shorter pieces. But when I was like, once I graduated high school, my wife and I moved out together, or she was my girlfriend then, but we moved out together. And I remember sitting there talking about, just how much I loved books and I was like, you know what? Maybe I could write a novel. Right. And I just started kind of talking about it. And she was like, just do it. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize that was something I could just do. So, you know what I mean? And like, I started typing away and I had no idea. I was like, I've been reading for a long time and I had written stuff, but when you start thinking about a new form of creation, I didn't know how to get from, the first sentence to the second sentence, let alone chapter 1 to chapter 50, right? It's this very confusing process. It's also kind of like, to use a music analogy is, when you, like as a drummer and someone that's been drumming his whole life, I can hear just the structure of music, right? I'm like, oh, this is the verse, this is the chorus, this is the verse, this is the bridge, right? And so I can know like basic songs almost automatically. And I know kind of the typical beats. If I turn on any 80s radio station, for instance, I could probably play every single one of those songs just hearing it for about 5 seconds. That's not
fitting in.
It's just the style of music, right? Now, there's obviously more advanced music that I can't do that to, but it's a general guide. Now, my wife has never really played an instrument. She doesn't I'll know when like a cymbal hit's coming just from a song I've really never heard. And she's asked me before, she's like, how do you know? Like, how do you know, like even the instruments you're hearing or like the parts of the drum set? Like, it's just, I'm internalized to it, right? But that's foreign to her. So in terms of teaching, when I was stepped in, it was entirely foreign. I didn't know, I was like still racking my brain around bell work. I was like, I don't even know how to give something good at the beginning of a class to get them engaged. So it's going from beginning of a lesson to the end of a lesson. I had no time management. I had no structures in place. Now luckily I had guiding teachers and mentors that didn't let me fail alone. There was a lot of failure, but they were always there to kind of give me a pointer. And I just listened, and I was never afraid to be open about this failure because that's the creative process. I had written so many things that had failed before that. I had started podcasts before Teach Me Teacher that failed, right? That no one will ever hear because no one listened, right? They were just creations that I made and failed. So that's how I treated teaching. My principal at the time, she said,
it offered info.
Skill, yeah. She said my number one skill was that I'm adaptive, that like instantly, like I just kind of move on to the next thing. Like I don't dwell and kind of, lick my wounds very long. And that process though, is eventually I started learning, what a classroom felt like. Right. And I was open to the kids and I said, hey, class hasn't been going good for the last 3 weeks, has it? No, because kids always know, right? They know the classes that are not going well. And I go, all right, so this is classroom 2.0, right? And then a few weeks later, all right, we're going classroom 2.5. And, and I just did that over and over again.
You actually told them?
Yeah, I straight up told them. I apologized for when, one of I was a horrible classroom manager, so I ended up yelling at kids a lot for no reason and just stuff that I don't yell ever now. And
but because you didn't have those set, you found yourself having to resort to that.
Yeah, like that's when you're yelling at kids, unless it's an extreme circumstance, you are generally you have skipped over other valid steps to get there. You don't creating positive relationships, creating standards for your classroom and expectations and procedures and trust and building that with kids. You don't have to yell at them. But I didn't know that. I mean, I was a yeller for probably a good 2 years before I developed enough sustainability to not do that. But so in terms of clarity, I started being able to lesson plan knowing, okay, so I'm going to need to break this up because I'm going to be talking for far too long. So I need to get them up and move them around. Right.
Ooh, you're able to gain an insight, like a inside baseball. Like you have someone that doesn't understand baseball. Another one is like, well, hold on. I'm looking at the pitcher and he's giving the signals. He's getting this and that. He's looking over there, look at a base. And the other one's like, how do you see all this stuff? Don't you watch baseball? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly right. And at first it was obvious too, right? I was kind of like the pilot flying the plane while showing them what I was doing in the cockpit, right? I was like, it was like I had the door open and I was like, hey, I don't know what this button does, but let's try it, right? And then eventually what happened is I was able to
Map it out.
hide some of that stuff. I was able to just kind of put a drape, and that way kids came in, they didn't realize anymore that really like class was actually happening. It was, oh, we're reading and writing and we're exploring ideas, and yeah, there's some tests that pops up every once in a while, and there's some data that comes here and there, but for the most part that stuff is so gone that they don't even think about it. They're so caught up in the classroom. And then it works even better. When I started, I was like, I love music. Why don't I listen to music in my classroom? Bought a stereo, play modern music pretty much all the time during writing, let them have their earbuds in, because it was those things that I found out. The more I made it feel less like school, the more I was able to do that. But all of that started is this slow process of going, okay, bell work. What do I do in the first 5 minutes of class? And then slowly getting good enough to where I could run a class.
Just to get a hint, what track? What's the vibe and what kind of music? Lo-fi? What's the kind of thing?
No, sometimes I do that, but in all honesty, we listen to the stuff that they listen to. I put Pandora on, and I put it on censored, right? So it doesn't drop any of the stuff. Now, some of the songs are still a little bit too graphic. I mean, they're 7th graders anyway. It's whatever. They're dancing to it on TikTok. What's the difference if it comes on the radio? But
they're writing.
Yeah, and we would I just listen to them and talk about the artists they like, and I just make, Pandora creates its own stations based on them. So I just make a bunch of them, and sometimes, we'll put on, if we're feeling good, I'll put on the Michael Jackson station, and that'll play all the oldies. That'll bring out all kinds of good songs with them, and the kids
get to give them
Michael
nutrition.
Jackson's timeless. By the way, the Jackson, man, I'm always shocked that every year kids like that, they know Billie Jean, they know all that stuff, man. But we'll listen to a lot of their music, and kids that don't want to listen to that, they put in their headphones. But most of the kids love it, because here's another thing. It's another class builder. So, something comes on, and it's, one of the artists that kids really liked to begin this year was Pop Smoke. I don't know if he's a rapper. I don't know if you know anything about it, but he has this one song that I was like, oh, I like this. So I listened to it at the gym, right? And so eventually I start rapping with them, or like singing or whatever it is. And so it becomes this thing. A song comes on, I'll turn it up for a good 20 seconds, and we'll just vibe for a minute. And then we go, all right, we go back, and it goes back to normal.
That's
but
awesome.
Like I would have, man, if I was a kid and like my teacher just started like jamming like Led Zeppelin or something like that, like it would have changed my life.
Wow. I thank you for sharing those insights, because I think that's so important for any educator who happens to be listening, to view through the eye of other educators, and perhaps even recognize, am I creating that kind of space? Like I'm seeing that within myself. I'm like, how can I allow the fingerprint of the student while we're in a mutual exchange of, this is your space too. And thank you for allowing me, the teacher, to facilitate you not giving up on yourself along those lines. I think that's so cool.
It's so much fun. And I've had, I take it like a couple steps further. I grew up with some of the teachers around me, we're all kind of the same age and came in at roughly the same time and developed as teachers at the same time. And, we would just crank up our in passing period, right? Kids are being shuffled in this hallway. We have the oldest building in our district. So, the hallways are small, very factory, everyone just goes this way. And we would just open the door up, crank the music up. We have our lights on. I had, like the lasers kind of going around the room. And so I'm having my door open. Kids walking by are like, they're looking in and like, I want to be in class. Yeah, exactly right. It's like my vision was, I was like, why does it have to be from class to class? I was like, I don't care what they're doing across the hall. I don't care what they're doing in another classroom. I was like, when they're walking by here, I either want them to want to be in my room, or I want them to be excited to get to my room. In schools, you don't have tardy problems because kids don't want to be in school. If kids are taking forever to get to your classes because you're not creating an environment that kids want to be in. And so I try to get that energy going, that excitement, so they come in there, and then here's what happens. I get to push them harder than anyone else because they want to be in the class. They know if things start acting up, if we start not doing our work, if we're slacking off, if we're abusing this freedom, guess what? The fluorescent lights come on, the music goes off. Chastain's sitting in a chair now. We're gonna do this, and sometimes it happens like, oh no, we don't want that. And I go, boom, it all comes back on. I'm like, all right, let's get to work then. And
so you get to make the choice.
That's right. And they're always going to choose that. They're going to choose the room that has the music and the lights and the fun vibe, because who doesn't? That class might be the only time that kid gets to actually relax and
not feel the social pulls of like, well, I gotta, remember, I gotta say this stuff. Like, no. We got enough in the room.
Yeah. And I know it's frowned upon. You're like, well, class shouldn't be a place to relax. Why not? Like the Greek philosophers, what did they do? Like they sat around in their robes and ate grapes and just talked willy-nilly out into the open and thought, and they wrote, and they were better for it. Like you don't work better the more stress you have, right? Like especially if you're a kid. So to lower that filter for them, even a little bit, I find that they learn at a deeper level because they're not worrying about other things.
And perhaps if that stress is there, it's because they want to impose it on themselves. It's like, we've experienced it, right? I could imagine yourself, staying up late because you want to make sure the lesson plan is exactly where it needs to be, or the class is set up the way it needs to be. And yes, it's a stress because you got family, puzzling everyday life, but it's not that it's being imposed on you. You're embracing it fully. I think that's so special, man. I think, thank you for your service, man, out in the field with kiddos. And I really like the parallel that you brought about that we were riffing on the idea of writing. And at first it's a blur. And in the classroom, we could find ourselves, being, having to wield the yelling machine within. And it's like, wait, something's missing here. And I want to draw it to something that I think we're within the cultural landscape that we're all sharing, but it shares parallel in terms of that. I'm wondering, are we facing a like growing pains, like an initial flash of virtual reality where we don't know how to express culturally as eloquent and justified thoughts may be across the spectrum of expressions? It's there's that proclivity for virtual yelling, like I was just scanning through my Facebook, where threads get, let's just say within friends and all across different friends who don't know each other. And they get quite, let's just say, the civility is not as present. And I think that's reflective as in like our first times teaching, where we find ourselves yelling or, kind of like on that forceful side. And I was like, wait, something is missing here. And a thought came to mind, and I wanted to share it with you and just ask, what is it that comes to mind? And the thought is, what may social media bear? Let me rephrase. How may social media bear proclivity to ultimately further divide, even with the most justifiable points of acknowledgement of today's times? May we continually invite, ultimately through outcomes that unite. What comes to mind?
I don't know. Social media is scary, right? Because it's new, and it's so manipulative. I don't decry. I don't subscribe to the idea that social media isn't evil. I like Gary Vee's comment about it. People always ask him about social media and what it is, and he goes, "Social media is not bad." He goes, "It's a mirror." He goes, "It shows us who we are as people, and if you don't like what you see, there's probably a reason for that." And I think that's true. I think there is some manipulation. There's definitely some algorithmic issues that we're having to work ourselves through because Yeah, just because it's quickly to fall. You can quickly fall into echo chambers, and a lot of people don't realize that they're not just seeing the good stuff; they're being shown the stuff that targets them demographically.
Yes,
and a lot of people don't even realize that that's happening, right?
because they're living their life.
Which is why, yeah, well, they're living their life, but it's also they're older, right? A lot of older people don't realize that that's being done. And so a lot of younger people don't either. I think our generation and kind of the generation that kind of grew up with this advancing social media and kind of grew up with it, I think we have a unique insight into seeing, kind of remembering what the world was like early enough and then seeing it compared to what it's like now with social media.
You saw the grip. And we saw the grip.
Right. And I think that's a unique standpoint that only kind of the millennial generation or Gen Z, whatever, has. That doesn't mean we understand the technology any better, but I think that's an interesting intersection. So I don't believe it's evil. And I think it even exposes, I think what it does I think what the next generation is going to do. Okay. Let's go to that. I think what's going to happen as technology advances, as technology becomes even more accessible, as social media becomes even more powerful in its ability to connect us in a variety of ways, with the rise of VR and being able to be in the same room without being in the same room. And what does that mean to social spaces and business and everything else? I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that gets wrapped up in this. What does that mean for politics? If we could zap our way through VR to experience the horror that's happening with Israel and Palestine, we might have different views rather than reading,
just one
200 character. Yeah. Instead of reading a tweet from someone and deciding that's how we believe about it. Right. And so I think the people that are the kids that we're teaching now, I think it's imperative that we teach them to use their voice in ways that are effective for what they need, both personally and socially, because what they're going to drive these companies to do is they're going to drive them to be better at what they do. Now, whether that leads to more positivity or negativity, I got to go back to Gary Vee's viewpoint of, we see the social media becomes what the culture is. It's just mirroring it, it's putting a spotlight on it. So if we grow as people, if we keep listening to others, if we keep breaking echo chambers, if we keep jumping on podcasts with people that live in other cities, and that, if we keep having these things, then I think that the general good outweighs the bad. One more important thing, I think I've mentioned evolution like 4 times on this show. The one thing to remember is that our brains are wired to seek and retain the negative more than the positive, because if you know there's water next to you, or if that's something you have, you're not going to think about it as much. And it doesn't really cost you anything, because it's like, oh, it's right there. But if you forget about the poisonous snake in the bushes, you're dead. So our brains are wired to hyper focus on the negative, which is why social media does this, which is why it creates clickbait, which is why most of this is caused by just us trying to survive and trying to make sense. This is where tribalism comes from, right? It's a survival mechanic. We're like, well, as long as I'm with my people, the lion's not going to kill us today. And so I think we have to remember that. But I think I think that stuff isn't hardwired forever. I think you can change the wiring of people. I think, there's gurus that do this, and there are meditation masters, and there are people that have transcended kind of what it means to be trapped in this bubble of human emotion. And I think we're just going to keep doing that as a people. I really do. I'm really hopeful about everything. If you can't tell, I really don't have a lot of negativity. I think there's negative things to address, and there's definitely some bad in the world, but I think overall we're geared towards the better things in life. Living today is better than living 100 years ago, without a doubt.
Amen. I have to say, thank you for your time. Thank you for your time. I want to ask one last little question before we go. Share your plugs, man. Where is it that we can find? Thank you so much for your time. Everyone, as he's about to share, be sure to follow what he's sharing. And it covers within these topics that we jumped on in depth with other people. And I think it's very important, especially the intersection of thought. Where can we find you, brother?
Man, I think the number one place is, if you want to find my work, is teachmeteacherpodcast.com. That'll send you to all the links that you really need to get to, but you can find Teach Me Teacher on Facebook. We have about 52,000 strong over there. You can find me on my more personal Instagram at Teach Me Teacher Host, where I post, about me shaving my beard and regretting it and doing all kinds of stuff.
And your wife saying she misses it.
That's right. So, Instagram is my more personal one. I'm on Twitter as well, Jacob Chastain _. I don't tweet all that often because I think Twitter is kind of a miserable place to be a lot of the times, but I do like engaging over there as well if I'm feeling feisty. That I jump over there. But if people are more interested in, so Teach Me Teacher is my main podcast. I have another podcast called Craft and Draft, which can be found at craftsanddraftworkshop.com. But Craft and Draft is all about, it's just me and my partner talking about how we approach the actual literacy classroom. So Teach Me Teacher talks about anything that's connected to education. Craft and Draft is just her and I bouncing ideas off back and forth, planning, addressing what it's like to teach literacy in today's world, with giving kids independent choice in reading and writing. So those are all my places. I hope people come around.
Yeah.
Join Teach Me Teacher. We have an amazing audience over there. We're all very positive and open about life.
Well, allow that curious eye, folks, and be sure to take a peek. And should you feel resonance, which you shall, you're going to find yourself at home. And, of course, while we're here, smash that like button, make it blue, share with someone that you share vibe with, hit that subscribe button, make it go gray, right? And tap on that notification bell, doing all that YouTube stuff, right?
That's right.
And, here's the question that I want to toss at you to conclude. How may we, and you really touched base on it, which I love, and I want to see if we can encapsulate it in a couple, in a couple phrases. I'm curious what comes to mind. It goes like this: how may we better be arbiters and advocates for peace in our daily conversations, especially during times of tribulations?
Seek truth, not to be right. That's my response. If you're always looking for what is true, I think your conflicts around whatever you're doing, whether you're working with kids, whether you're working with adults, whether you're working with yourself, I think it's going to mitigate that stuff. If we had more people looking for what's true rather than trying to push specific sides of an agenda, I think we'd be a lot farther in a lot of these hard conversations we're having.
Thank you, brother. And you know what? Our kids see it. Don't they, huh? Especially when they feel like they're being lied to. Like, but sir, that's not true. All right, well, hold on. And when you mutually seek truth, they respect that.
That's right.
Brother, thank you for your service out and about. Shall we high five it out? Boom, just like that.